We're going to switch over to aquatic plants and algae, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Greg Bugbee. Greg is our current president. Greg is an associate scientist at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. He's worked in the field of aquatic plant management for over 40 years. He's been involved in surveying over 400 lakes in the state of Connecticut, and he has been really front and center in addressing the conundrum of hydrilla and the Connecticut River.
I'm going to be talking today on hydrilla in the Connecticut River and getting into sort of the moving on from some of the survey work, which I'm going to talk about to kind of set the scene, but into, all right, what do we do now? What kind of management is there available to us to potentially solve this problem? And my first slide right here is become kind of the poster child of the problem. This is not the Connecticut River, but it's a tributary called the Mattabesett River. And this shows the extent of the hydrilla problem. This is all monoculture hydrilla to the surface, topped out, goes for miles from the Connecticut River up through this tributary. And, you know, it wasn't so long ago that certainly I thought that Connecticut was kind of immune to this type of a problem with hydrilla. This is more of a, you know, southeast part of the United States issue. But back in the late 2010s, we did quantify and discover this, but apparently was a fairly large, fairly old infestation. It had been around a while, which people had not really picked up. But ever since then, we've been out and trying to quantify the problem, and now we're sort of into, okay, what can we do about it? If we, okay, let's see here, I gotta go. Has this happened before? All right, why am I not advancing? Okay, there we go. Okay. Now, when it comes to hydrilla, most of us know all about it, but I'm sure there's a few, at least what it's like and what its characteristics are, but there probably are a few new people that aren't, so I'm going to just quickly go over this. Hydrilla is often called the perfect weed because it has so many ways it can reproduce. It has, in addition to plant fragments breaking off and rooting, it has the ability to spread by what is called turions, which are propagules that are on the stems usually, above the sediment line, that will break off and take root. And also it can spread and reproduce by these tubers, which are underground structures, much like the turion, but they're underground and can be in the sediment, you know, foot down. They can last for a decade or more, and certainly, you know, cause big issues when it comes to managing it and preventing regrowth. Hydrilla that we generally see has more often than not 5 what we call leaves to the whorl, and you know, that's sort of typical hydrilla. Now, the Connecticut River hydrilla we found does not have does not have tubers, and it often has more than 5, a lot more than 5 leaves per whorls. And it looks, let's just go to the next slide here. Let's just go over also before I get into the tuber issue is, you know, again, the differences between the Connecticut River hydrilla and generally, when we talk about hydrilla, we talk about what's called the monoecious northern version and the dioecious southern version in some areas where they are mixed. This is a classic slide from USGS. You might notice there's a little gray area here for the Connecticut River area, and that is unknown. We don't know whether this is dioecious or monoecious at this point. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Another thing you might not realize is just how far north this plant is likely to be able to exist. This is a APHIS USDA map showing the adaptability or suitability, I should say, to the climates of North America, showing that, you know, well into Canada, there's high probabilities that this that hydrilla will be able to exist, and even a lot further north than that, really nearing the Arctic Circle. So this plant can certainly is not likely to be limited by the climate. Certainly we have here in New England. In Connecticut, we have found hydrilla now throughout the Connecticut River and in a few lakes. This is Mystic Seaport Pond, Coventry Lake, Held Pond, and then just this year, these are some of the Norwalk reservoirs. Now, these hydrilla strains, we're going to start talking about strains now, are different than the Connecticut River strain. And this has been borne out by now 2 different examinations using genetics, using DNA sequencing. First one was done with us and Nick Tipperia at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. And the next one was done more recently by Dean Williams, who is the next speaker. I'm not going to go into too much detail because he's going to talk all about the differences in the genetics of this Connecticut River strain and what that might mean. But again, this is Connecticut River strain here, and these are the 2 other Connecticut Lake type strains. You can see how much more robust this is. The other issue, which we took a long, because first we didn't believe, and that is we cannot find tubers on the Connecticut River strain. We've looked, we've had, experts upon experts. This is Dr. Mark Heilman. We were out there this spring looking at how this was regrowing after the winter, looking for tubers. We could not find any. This is Chris Doyle, who you well know. He was out with me in 2020 in the fall looking. We could not find him. And here is, again, Mark Heilman, Chris, myself, and Mark Ballou from Solitude looking. We cannot find tubers anywhere with this Connecticut River version. And that plays a role in management, which we'll be discussing in a bit. What we do find, certainly when we look for how this plant overwinters, is an abundance of turions. This is, we're pulling up plants, seeing how they propagated, what they propagated from, and most of the time we'll see a turion associated with a spring plant. Some cases we saw what apparently was just fragments that may have survived. We could not find surviving root systems, or we can't rule that out. One thing about these turions is they often were at the base of the plant. Even this is actually not even in the spring. These were being produced in late summer, fall from the base of the plant. You can see how white this is. There's no photosynthesis going on. And that could be an issue with management because it's harder to treat things that are in the sediment compared to what's at the surface. Now, when we talk about the Connecticut River, I mean, we got to realize this is a long river. It's 406 miles from the Canadian border. It travels, between New Hampshire and Vermont, through Massachusetts into Connecticut, and it has a lot of these tributaries. I already mentioned the Mattabesset, which is in this area here, as one of the tributaries. But these tributaries are certainly, I think, going to be very prone to, based on what we see in Connecticut, infestations of this hydrilla. I'm not sure why that red dot's going around there, but anyways, it is a American Heritage River, First National Blueway. It has a very diverse habitat critical to Long Island Sound. It has in Connecticut anyway, quite an extensive population of American bald eagles. And we have Susan Wild, who will be speaking on some of the issues that have come up down south with cyanobacteria and neurotoxins associated with hydrilla that are killing wildfowl, including the bald eagles. And this is something that I think is a big worry. In the Connecticut River system, there is large acreages of Vallisneria americana. This is native eelgrass, which is considered to be a prime habitat for fish and other organisms, and losing that habitat could potentially be a big issue. So when we're talking about management, we also got to be worried a little bit about, protecting the native eelgrass beds. My group, the Connecticut Ag Station, has now issued 2 reports which are give the information on our complete surveys of the river. First part was done in 2019 of the southern section, southern third, and the next 2/3 were completed in 2020 and 2021. Again, if you want the copies of these reports, please email me and I will get them to you. We also have on our website, you can find it here, you go to the website and click on the Connecticut River Survey and you'll see a web app where you can zoom in and zoom out and look at all our results of our survey work there. So feel free to check that out. Now, if we look at, again, what we're dealing with as far as management, we looked in our survey work at all the invasives, and by far in the Connecticut River, Connecticut portion anyway, hydrilla was the greatest, 842 acres with a large amount, very abundant and topped out. The next plant in the river system and its tributaries that we looked at was Eurasian water milfoil, and then we had these others. So again, hydrilla now is by far the most abundant invasive species in the river. Just to give you again an idea when it comes to management, what we're dealing with, first of all, this is the Massachusetts border with Connecticut right here, and this is the northernmost sighting of it. And there's a dense stand right at the this is the amusement park here, Six Flags Amusement Park, right where that is, and there's a little outlet stream here, but we haven't found anything in there. All of a sudden hydrilla becomes very dense, and you can see it here, which is similar to this area here. You can see in general, the middle sections of the river do not have hydrilla. It'd only be maybe a shoal area and that sort of thing. So a lot of the river at the main stem level anyway does not have hydrilla. It's too deep. Water clarity is not good, at least in a lot of the river. Up north it's not bad at all, but down south it's poor. But for whatever reason, whether it's scouring or flow or whatever, you don't really see this, and I'm sure depth is a big one in the center part of the river, usually. As we move further down through the river, this is the lower middle section. Again, you can see a little more spotty here, but when we look at some of the coves, this is what's called Wethersfield Cove, and this is Keeney Cove. There is considerable hydrilla in those areas. If we let's see, if we look at just zoom in a little bit here, and you can see Wethersfield Cove a little bit clearer, and the center is pretty good, but the sides are not good. And then we go to this Keeney Cove here, and that's pretty much completely engulfed. But we get to the very southern section of the river, again, it's along the sidewalls, it's in the tributaries, it's in the coves. But as you get a few miles north of Long Island Sound, more than likely the salinity is high enough to prevent it. And we see very little of it there. We see some Eurasian water milfoil, which seems to be, this is the pink, which seems to be a little more tolerant. And again, this is just another slide showing as we get further south, there's less along the sidewalls of the main stem, but when we get into the coves and the tributaries, this orange is hydrilla. If we just look, this is a video of Selden Cove this past summer, and you can see the extent of the hydrilla infestation here. Basically, coves are entirely engulfed.
Completely choked with hydrilla.
All right, so let's get into management. All right, what do we got? Well, obviously, we have issues in a river system this large. We have to consider that in the Connecticut section alone, if we are looking at the shoreline of tributaries and the actual rivers itself, there's 200 plus miles, and most of those miles have at least some hydrilla somewhere in there. There is river and tidal flow issues with management. The tidal action actually goes north of Hartford, almost to the Mass line. You can, there's going to be ebb and flow with tides, which could affect management, particularly herbicide concentrations. There's silt issues, there's state listed species issues. There's a large number of stakeholders, meaning towns and that sort of thing, that may want to have a say, or certainly have to be notified. There's going to be some fair amount of permitting issues, and there's a lot more research needed. Okay, I just want to touch a little bit more on some of these issues. Let's look at the state listed species issue. This is the Connecticut River. This is anything that has this sort of orangey hash mark is where there's state listed species that need to be looked at. So essentially the entire river has state listed species. We look at what these are, and I want to thank the Connecticut folks up at the Natural Diversity Database at Connecticut DEP, particularly Bill Moorhead and Karen Zyko, for supplying these lists to me. You can see there's large numbers of plants and invertebrates, and other organisms. I mean, everything from freshwater mussels to dragonflies, damselflies, tiger beetles, various birds and fish, blueback herring, sturgeon, that sort of thing. Now, I will tell you that, and the NDDB folks have assured me that they fully understand the magnitude of the problem of the hydrilla, and they are going to be working very closely to make sure that everything can be done to manage it. Now, another issue which is on the table here is the flow rate and the tidal action. We talked about tidal action, and flow rate in the river is enormous, and depending upon rain flow and that sort of thing. This is just a slide of the Connecticut River dumping sediment. This is August of 2011. Granted, we had Tropical Storm Irene blow through and put many inches of rain in the area, but the river is very prone to siltation. This is again the Connecticut. This happens to be the Thames River, which had obviously the same conditions, and you can see absolutely no siltation, sedimentation coming out of the Thames River. But the Connecticut River, the land in the center area is what was the old Lake Hitchcock, glacial lake, where there was considerable deposition of silt and clay for thousands of years, which creates the beautiful Central Valley of Connecticut soils that we farm in, but also is very erodible. And so again, this is going to be an issue when we're looking at, for instance, herbicides and maybe some other things, certainly the siltation and the flow rate. Flow rates in the river are many thousands of cubic feet per second, and in the case of this storm, it went up to 128,000 cubic feet per second. So again, that's going to be something that's going to be taken into account, that particularly with herbicide treatments, we may have some years with suboptimal flow conditions that could hinder us. All right, let's look at the actual management options. And this is sort of a general slide. I'm going to touch on some of these in more detail after this slide. First of all, one might think, let's do a grass carp introduction into the river. Grass carp are known to really prefer hydrilla and certainly would feed on it. But these fish are highly migratory. They would more than likely move upstream. They would more than likely affect state listed species, particularly plants. And I can't talk for our fisheries unit up at Connecticut DEP, but I would think this would be a hard sell, but they can answer that question better than I. So I'm going to leave this behind right now. It's probably a non-starter for the moment, but you never know. Harvesting, we're going to talk about in a minute in another slide. Education certainly is important. This would be, signage at the boat launch ramps. We don't want this to move to other places. And I will say there has been catches at other in other states at boat launch, by boat launch inspectors of Connecticut hydrilla on boats before they were launched. So that potential is certainly there, and education is going to be a part of it. But as you know, with a lot of this, it's not going to be anywhere near the total answer. In Connecticut, we are a little behind some of the other states when it comes to boat wash stations going in and out of ramps. Virtually none are available in the state, and maybe something we have to look at, getting funding and personnel to man them. So I'm going to just go to the next slide and touch on some of these, I think, more likely options. And one of the more likely options is harvesting. Now you might say, well, you know, a lot of us who have been in the business a long time kind of roll our eyes about harvesting because we've seen so many cases where it hasn't worked well. But the thing where it could work well here is because the lack of tubers. So without these in-sediment propagules, if the turions could be removed, maybe that could give some control. We worry a little bit about these turions that are at the basal part of the plant, which would not be probably removed. So this might not work well, but it's certainly, I think, on the table. We've talked to some legislators, particularly one of the leads of the Environment Committee, and obviously they would much rather propose a non-chemical, non-herbicidal option, at least at the outgo, and so maybe this would be a way to go. We're not so sure about the root system, whether it's perennial or not. Right now, I don't think it is, but I can't say that for sure. So again, harvesting, I think, is a potential option. Herbicides right now are considered probably the most likely option for any kind of large-scale control. If we did this on a river-wide, at least even Connecticut and tributaries part of the river, it would be the largest herbicide application I know of, and certainly my colleagues I've talked to know of. So, you know, it would be extremely expensive. We'd be talking tens of millions of dollars a year. My guess is that if the herbicide, we started herbicide work, it would probably be in some of the tributaries and maybe up north and maybe in the Massachusetts section, because you prevent it from moving downward into treated sites. What are the potential herbicides? Well, right now, fluoridone, both liquid and granular, seem most likely. Work up at New York, at the Croton River by New York DEC has shown that you can be injected into a smaller river system with very good control over time. And there's been some work by US Army Corps and some of the lakes using low-dose split applications of fluoridone granules with success, but this has mainly been in lakes. And these split applications, I mean, it's once a week for 10 weeks, so it's not, you know, this is not certainly is labor intensive. Procelicor is on the table. Talking with Mark Hahnemann about this. He would like to look at this in more detail because it would have such a low risk to the eelgrass being a monocot. It would not be too likely to be affected. And then there's been some proposals just to try a diquat treatment or some sort of contact, quick-acting herbicide, see if that will work. We do know that these contact herbicides are a little bit of an issue where there's silt and clay in the water, where there's biofilm on plants, and this is certainly the case in the Connecticut River. We have looked, this is working with the Connecticut River Conservancy and Kelsey Wetling up there. We partnered with them to look at some bottom blanket installations. This is a marina called Portland Boat Works in Portland, Connecticut. In mid-May, we put 4 out and separated them a little bit to see what would occur in between. Removed them 4 weeks later, and we got pretty good control in these areas. This is drone footage of the site. We did a later application of these bottom blankets, and we overlapped them and kept them for 4 weeks, and really didn't have as good control. A lot of the hydrilla just sort of flapped up around the edges and continued to grow. So this early season bottom blanket idea could work in small areas, definitely labor intensive. You know, we were able to do it. I mean, there was a lot of river flow here. We were able to drop these and get them in and get them out pretty well. Now, there's one last hope, and this is some information that was supplied to me by Kelsey Wetling from Connecticut River Conservancy, is, you know, maybe there will be a natural decline over time, and this is occurring in both in Texas and Louisiana, where there's been some articles on why is hydrilla all of a sudden beginning to decline, and even bass fishermen are complaining because they feel it's such a good habitat for bass and for fishing in and around. So, you know, there's a possibility there may be something that occurs that causes some sort of natural decline. In these cases, it wasn't only hydrilla, it was a lot of the other plants too, so they were very concerned. So that is certainly on the table as a possibility, but I don't think we want to move forward with that as our only hope. I'm going to end here and just acknowledge just a lot of people who worked with me and with us on this. We worked with them. Northeast Aquatic Nuisance Species Panel, they were great in helping out, getting this started and some of the DNA work. And with that, I'll end, take questions that you might have. I know I'm just about out of time, and we'll let you move on to the conference.
Thanks, Greg. A few quick questions. What was the month of the picture of Six Flags where the hydrilla picture was taken? What month was that?
That was taken in, I believe, August.
Okay, great. What's the uncertainty, excuse me, what is the certainty that the entire infestation in this is this unknown hydrilla biotype throughout the Connecticut River? That may be a split question between you and the next presenter.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave. That is going to be discussed with the next speaker who looked into this more detail. But I think, given the fact that both the Tipperary work and then Dean Williams' work is showing it to be different, it is. But Dean will be talking about that in detail in a minute.
Okay, and the last one is, have you done any mesocosm experiments to see the competitive advantage between Connecticut River and other biotypes of hydrilla?
You know, we have not. We have not done any mesocosm experiments. We've been working with North Carolina State on that. You know, and interesting, they've had a lot of trouble growing it in their mesocosms, which is very interesting. But yeah, the answer to this, at this point, we don't have those mesocosm studies.
Thanks, Greg.